Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're doing a deep dive into Time Technoplast.
Okay.
This is an Indian manufacturing company, and they specialize in polymer and composite products.
Right.
And we've got some interesting source material here. We've got their Q2 and Q3 earnings calls for this fiscal year 2025. And also, we've got a snapshot from their annual report.
Cool.
So by the end of this deep dive, you'll understand their growth strategy, the innovations they're pursuing, and also why investors are really excited about them.
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting things that pops out right away is that Time Technoplast is targeting some pretty aggressive growth.
Okay.
They're aiming for a 15% overall growth rate,
Wow.
which is, particularly ambitious in the current economic conditions.
Right. They're not just relying on general economic growth.
Exactly.
They're really focusing on certain products to drive that expansion.
Yeah.
And in their earnings calls, they kept mentioning this term, value-added products,
Yeah.
with a goal of getting those to represent 35% of their total sales.
So you can really see that reflected in their financial performance
Right.
over the last couple of quarters.
Yeah.
I mean, they saw 17% volume growth in Q2
Wow.
and a 40% profit increase.
And that's not just in India, right? This growth?
No, this is happening across the board.
Across the board.
Yeah, not just in India, but in overseas markets as well.
And they're not just laser focused on growth.
No.
They're also taking steps to manage their debt.
Okay.
They actually stated a goal of being completely debt-free by March 2026.
Yeah, I think that's a really smart move, especially with such ambitious growth plans.
Right.
Reducing debt signals, financial stability, and long-term thinking, which can really attract investors.
Speaking of things that attract investors, let's talk about these composite cylinders.
Okay.
So they are lighter, safer, and more efficient than your traditional metal cylinders.
Right?
And the demand, especially for Type 5 CNG cylinders, is huge.
I mean, you have to consider the market forces at play here.
Yeah.
A lot of companies, especially in the industrial sector, were looking for ways to make their operations more fuel efficient
Right.
and eco-friendly.
Exactly.
So composite cylinders kind of play right into that.
Exactly. In Q2 alone, they reported an order book of Rs 185 crore just for these CNG cylinders. And to meet this demand, they're increasing their production capacity by a lot.
Yeah.
They're adding 600 cascades.
600 cascade.
And for those who aren't familiar with the term, a cascade is basically a bundle of cylinders
Right.
that are all connected together. And these are often used for storage and transportation of gases.
It's a significant investment.
Yeah.
And it really shows how confident they are in this technology.
Right.
They're not just dipping their toes in the water.
No.
They're diving in head first.
Absolutely. And they're not stopping there.
Oh.
They're also developing a 14.2 kilogram composite LPG cylinder.
Interesting.
Now, this is a big deal because
Yeah.
it directly competes with those heavy metal cylinders
Oh.
that are used everywhere in India.
Right.
And, they said in their report that there are like 50 core metal cylinders currently in use.
Yeah, so capturing even a small portion of that market with their composite alternative would be massive.
Right.
I mean, just think about the logistics.
Yep.
Composite cylinders are so much lighter,
Yeah.
which means transportation costs go down.
Makes sense.
That's a win for Time Technoplast and their customers.
Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about hydrogen,
Okay.
because they have actually achieved a pretty major milestone in this space.
Okay.
They're the first company in India to get approval for Type 3 hydrogen cylinders,
Wow.
and these are designed specifically for drones.
Interesting.
Now, this is where we really see their forward-thinking strategy in action.
Uh-huh.
They're not just reacting to the current market.
Right.
They're really trying to anticipate what's next.
Yeah.
And hydrogen is a big part of that,
for sure.
especially with companies like Reliance investing heavily in biogas plants
Okay.
that actually produce hydrogen as a byproduct.
It's a brilliant move.
Yeah.
Because these hydrogen cylinders, they offer double the range
Double.
compared to CNG cylinders.
So think about what that means for drones.
Yeah.
Longer flights, more efficient deliveries.
Right.
The possibilities are huge.
It makes you wonder
Yeah,
how this might play into the broader hydrogen economy.
that's a great point.
India is making a big push toward hydrogen fuel,
Uh-huh.
and Time Technoplast is really positioning itself to be a key player in that transition.
And investors are definitely paying attention.
Right.
There's been a lot of buzz around their qualified institutional placement,
Okay.
or QIP, of up to Rs 1,000 crore.
QIP, for those who don't know,
Yeah.
is basically a way for listed companies
Yeah,
to raise capital by issuing shares to qualified institutional buyers.
exactly. And this QIP is being seen as a major vote of confidence.
So investors are essentially betting on Time Technoplast's ability to execute their growth plans
Yes.
and become a dominant player in these new markets.
Right.
They're betting on the future of composite cylinders and hydrogen,
Huh.
and they seem to believe that Time Technoplast is the company to lead the charge.
That's a great point. It's not just about the products themselves.
Exactly.
It's about the company's overall vision
Uh-huh.
and their ability to adapt and innovate.
For sure.
And we'll explore that a lot further in the next part of our deep dive, where we're going to be looking into their expansion plans, investor relations strategies,
Okay.
and how they're navigating the challenges of a constantly evolving market.
Sounds good. So we've talked about like their big picture goals and some really interesting new products, but how are they actually putting these plans into action? What's their approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. And something that really jumped out at me in their earnings calls
Yep.
was their strategic use of acquisitions and partnerships.
Interesting.
They're not just trying to build everything from scratch.
Right.
They're really leveraging existing expertise
Yeah.
to accelerate their growth.
Acquisitions can be kind of a risky move, though, right?
Yeah.
Integrating different company cultures and operations can be tricky.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how Time Technoplast is approaching those challenges.
Yeah, that's a valid point. And they did address that in their Q3 call.
Okay.
They talked about conducting thorough due diligence before any acquisition.
Makes sense.
And they also mentioned that they have a dedicated team
Okay.
to make sure that integration goes smoothly.
Okay, so it sounds like they're taking a measured approach,
Yeah.
which is reassuring.
Take their expansion into the IBC market, for example.
Okay.
So instead of starting from zero,
Right.
they acquired a few existing companies that already had manufacturing facilities and distribution networks in place.
Okay.
And for those who aren't familiar, IBCs, or intermediate bulk containers,
Oh, okay.
are these large reusable containers
Okay.
that are used to transport and store liquids and bulk materials.
So like giant industrial-sized Tupperware,
Exactly.
like that.
So by acquiring these companies, they immediately got access to a whole new customer base and a head start in that market.
Right. It's a much faster way to expand
Yeah.
than building everything from scratch.
It's like they're playing this strategic game of chess.
I like that analogy.
You know, making these calculated moves
Uh-huh.
to gain a competitive advantage.
Right.
And it's not just about acquisitions.
Okay.
They've also formed a bunch of strategic joint ventures,
Interesting.
especially in their overseas operations.
I'm curious about those.
Yeah.
What kind of partnerships are we talking about?
Well, one example that they highlighted was this partnership with a major international player to manufacture steel drums.
Okay.
So this not only expanded their product portfolio, but it also gave them access to valuable technical know-how and new international markets.
It's a smart way to share resources and risks.
Uh-huh.
By partnering with these established players, they can tap into that existing expertise and distribution networks, which is huge for global expansion.
Now, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about investor relations, because this is obviously essential for any publicly traded company.
Right.
And Time Technoplast just seems to be doing a really great job in this area.
Yeah, based on the positive investor sentiment we've seen,
Right.
they seem very transparent and proactive in their communication with investors.
Yeah, they hold these regular earnings calls where they provide really detailed updates on their performance and their future plans.
Okay.
They don't shy away from those difficult questions or even acknowledging challenges.
I like that.
Yeah.
It builds trust.
Remember how they openly discussed that fire incident
Oh, yeah.
at one of their plants during the Q3 earnings call?
Right.
They didn't try to downplay it or sweep it under the rug.
Exactly.
They addressed it head on,
Yeah.
explained the situation, and laid out their recovery plan.
That kind of transparency is so important.
Yeah.
It builds trust and credibility with investors
Yeah.
because they appreciate honesty,
Uh-huh.
and it shows that the company is accountable
Right.
to its stakeholders.
They're also really good at highlighting their achievements,
Boy.
whether it's innovations, sustainability initiatives, or their commitment to social responsibility.
Right.
They really make sure that investors are aware of all those positive developments.
It's smart to showcase those aspects.
Yeah.
Because investors aren't just looking for financial returns.
Right.
A lot of them are also seeking companies that align with their values.
Yeah.
So that focus on sustainability and social impact could actually attract a broader range of investors.
Now, let's be realistic.
Right.
No company is without its challenges and potential risks.
For sure.
What are some of the headwinds that Time Technoplast might face?
Well, I think competition is a significant factor
Okay.
as composite cylinder and hydrogen technologies
Yeah.
become more widely adopted.
Uh-huh.
You're going to see more companies enter that market,
Right.
and that could lead to some downward pressure on prices, potentially
Yeah.
squeezing those profit margins.
And they did acknowledge this potential challenge in their earnings calls,
Okay.
but they also emphasized their first mover advantage,
Yeah.
the strong relationships they've already built with customers, and their ongoing investments in R&D.
I'm curious about those R&D investments.
Yeah.
What kind of innovations are they working on?
Yeah.
Are they focused on, like, improving existing products or exploring completely new technologies?
Well, they didn't get into specifics during the calls,
Okay.
but they did mention that they're exploring alternative materials
Oh.
and production processes,
Interesting.
potentially to reduce their reliance on certain raw materials.
Okay.
And they also hinted at some exciting developments in battery technology.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Which could tie into their work with e-rickshaws.
Exactly.
Speaking of raw materials. Another challenge they could face is the volatility of prices,
Oh, yeah.
particularly in the polymer industry.
Makes sense.
Fluctuating oil prices
Yeah.
can directly impact their cost and profitability.
And they've talked about strategies for dealing with that,
Okay.
like locking in prices with suppliers through long-term contracts
Right.
and diversifying their sourcing
Sure.
to kind of mitigate risk.
It's a proactive approach to supply chain management,
Yeah.
which is super important
Oh,
in
right.
today's uncertain global landscape.
They're also exposed to the risks that just come with operating
Yeah.
in multiple international markets, for
Right.
sure. Fluctuating exchange rates, political instability, trade barriers.
Yeah, global expansion always comes with a certain level of risk, but also offers a huge amount of growth potential.
Yeah.
So it sounds like they're taking steps to manage those risks,
Right,
like
right.
building strong local teams in each market.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We-
We've talked about their financial performance,
Uh-huh.
their growth strategy,
Yep.
the innovations they're working on,
Yeah.
their investor relations,
Right.
and even those potential risks.
It's clear that Time Technoplast is a complex company
Yeah,
operating in a really dynamic environment.
absolutely.
But I think the big question is, how do they make sure all these pieces
Yeah.
work together effectively?
Right.
How do they maintain that agility
Mm.
and responsiveness in the face of constant change?
That's a great question.
And that's something we're going to explore in the final part of our deep dive.
So we've seen their strategic moves, the innovations, their financial performance. But what about the internal workings of Time Technoplast? What's the culture like? How does their leadership style contribute to their success?
Yeah, it's like looking under the hood, right?
Yeah,
Trying to understand what makes them tick.
exactly.
From what I've gathered from these earnings calls and reports,
Yeah.
they seem to have a very dynamic, agile culture with a strong emphasis on customer focus.
I agree. They actually talked about having a decentralized decision-making structure,
Oh, interesting.
which empowers their local teams to respond quickly to
Okay.
customer needs and market changes.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider their global operations.
Right.
Giving local teams more autonomy
Yeah.
can lead to faster decision-making
Right.
and a better understanding of those specific market nuances.
Exactly. They've also emphasized their commitment to continuous improvement,
Oh.
constantly looking for ways to streamline processes
Yeah.
and enhance efficiency.
So it sounds like a culture that's not afraid to challenge the status quo
Right.
and constantly strive for better ways of doing things.
Exactly.
It's not just about setting goals.
Uh-huh.
It's about having the systems in place to actually achieve them.
And a big part of that is their focus on talent development.
Okay.
They've talked about investing heavily in training and upskilling their workforce.
Investing in your employees is one of the smartest things a company can do.
Right.
It fosters loyalty, boosts morale, and it ensures that your team has the skills to navigate this changing market landscape.
Absolutely. And it's clear that Time Technoplast's leadership really recognizes this.
Yeah.
They mention these programs to identify and nurture high-potential employees,
Oh, wow.
creating a pipeline of future leaders.
That's a forward-thinking approach.
Yeah.
By developing that talent internally,
Right.
they're not just filling positions, they're building a strong leadership bench for the future.
Now let's talk about risk management.
Oh,
No business can completely eliminate risk,
right.
but how is Time Technoplast approaching this?
Well, they seem to be taking a very proactive approach to risk assessment and mitigation.
Okay.
They've talked about having systems in place to identify potential threats
Uh-huh.
across all aspects of their operations,
Okay.
whether it's supply chain disruptions,
Yeah.
geopolitical instability, environmental compliance issues,
Right.
even cybersecurity threats.
It's about being prepared.
Exactly.
Right.
Having those contingency plans in place
Yeah.
can make a huge difference when those unexpected challenges arise. You
Exactly.
got to be able to adapt quickly,
Yeah.
especially in today's business environment.
So looking at everything we've covered,
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
financials, innovations, strategic moves,
Their internal culture,
yeah, internal culture, leadership.
it really paints a picture of a company
Yeah.
that's not just ambitious,
Yeah.
but also strategic and adaptable.
I agree.
They're not just reacting to the market.
Right.
They're anticipating what's next
Yeah.
and positioning themselves accordingly.
Exactly.
And they're not afraid to embrace new technologies,
Hmm.
explore uncharted territory.
And they're doing all of
Right.
this while also being mindful
Yeah,
of their social and environmental impact.
absolutely. It's a really compelling combination.
It is. It raises an interesting question, though.
What's that?
Could Time Technoplast become a global leader
Okay.
in sustainable technology solutions?
It's possible.
If they can successfully execute their plans in these emerging markets and
Okay.
continue to innovate at this
Yeah.
pace, I think they have a real shot.
I think so too.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Time Technoplast,
Okay.
what stood out to you the most?
Well,
What are your thoughts on their future prospects?
I think
Let us know.
we're always up for another deep dive.